What's happening, party people? Welcome to Punchboard Party. We are talking about everything we know about Red Rising. And you know what? It's been over 2 weeks since we had the initial announcement for the Red Rising board game by Jamie Stegmaier and Alexander Schmidt. And now we know everything. Absolutely everything. We have a watch and play video by Rodney Smith. We have a run through by Before You Play. Dan King has done an overview. If you want to, you can check out anything you want to know about this game, and I have all of the links in the description below. This week, I picked up a copy of Fantasy Realms, which Red Rising is greatly influenced by. And so what I love now is having the insight of playing through Fantasy Realms and having an idea of what improvements are coming our way in Red Rising. The setup for Fantasy Realms is quite simple. You just deal out 7 cards to each player, then you put the main deck in the middle of the table. On your turn, you draw a card from either the main deck or from one of the face-up discard tableau that you end up making in the middle of the table. Setup for Red Rising, how it improves on this situation, is that instead of starting with just the deck with no cards face up on the table, you're actually going to start at each of the 4 locations in the game. You're going to randomly deal out 2 cards to each location, putting one on top of the other, so that you're starting to form those piles at those locations. And so what's really cool about that is in Fantasy Realms, when you start playing the game, your first couple turns are just kind of drawing a card and then discarding a card until some things start to kind of show up on the table that are appealing or attractive to players, and players start getting their head around what might be out there. But Red Rising cuts right to the chase, and you have the ability to draw cards from the locations immediately. Otherwise, the setup for Red Rising is really easy. You know, you just put out the game board, you put those 2 character cards at each location, then you hand out everyone's influence tokens, you give them 5 cards. If House Apollo is represented in the game, then they're going to be the star player. Otherwise, you choose another star player randomly, and away you go. So late last week and this week, the main addition to what we know about the game is the rest of the colors in the game, or the rest of the cast, and how their abilities are going to work. Hearing all this and seeing all this crystallized in my mind, how dynamic and interactive the card play is supposed to be in this game. So the cards that were revealed since the last time I talked about this game were the blues, the grays, orange, pink, brown, and silver. And a lot of these characters, so 4 of these colors, the grays, the orange, the browns, and the pink, they all have a lot to do with making cards more accessible or more restricted. Imagine if you know that a player is going after a particular character because that's going to make them a ton of points, and you can just play a card that banishes that card from the game. That's a really good move. That's a keen strategy. Now you're thinking, what about being that player and realizing that that strategy that you were going after is now gone? That's sort of unfair. So the oranges and the grays really help with a situation where you're looking for one specific card and you can't find it. So oranges, you can treat that card as if it has the name of any other character card in the game. And grays, you can treat them like any other cast color in the game. So what Jamie and Alexander discovered during blind playtesting was that players were starting to feel, because the deck was so huge, like 120 cards plus, that when they needed a specific card to combo with another card in their hand and they were looking for that, there wasn't much hope for them to find it in such a big deck. And so they designed the oranges and the grays specifically to make up for that kind of a thing, so that those cards could essentially duplicate another card that they're looking for. So those are cool ways that they intentionally made up for having a lot of unique cards in a pretty big deck. So okay, we've talked about orange and grays. Let's talk a bit about the pinks. So I haven't read the book. I really need to get into it because the pinks, they're called companions, and I get the impression that they might be sexual companions, and that it might even be sort of like sex trafficking type of thing that's alluded to in the book here. And so my heart kind of goes out to these characters depending on what they have to go through in the story. But the pink abilities, they have these abilities of banishing cards from a location altogether. So you deploy them to the location, you banish all the cards from that location, and then you gain points depending on a particular color faction that's at that location. So that's a really neat way to get victory points. It also makes me wonder thematically what's going on there. I'm sure it would make sense to people who have read the book, but I find that quite interesting. So when we're looking at the browns, we're looking at the assistant cast, and they're all about wanting to be with a certain kind of cast. They are assistants to a particular color. So we have a card here that wants to be with reds and browns, and so when they're placed at a location directly on top of a red or a brown, you can move that card to another location and subsequently draw it back up into your hand, and at the end of the game they're going to get points for being in a hand with those colors that they like to be on top of or with. And so assistants have a specific thing that they assist, and they want to be with that color. So that's a pretty cool thing thematically, and again another neat way to move cards around. Because here's the thing, when you're thinking about this game, at first I was thinking about the mechanic being very simple, where I play a card to a location and then I draw a card from the top stack of another location. But now I'm starting to think about all the layers here of how there's cards, 3 or 4 cards under at a location. And how am I going to get to those? Do I have to wait turn after turn and kind of mill that location until I get the card that I really want there? But no, now there's cards that will get me direct access to the cards I'm looking for if they're out on the table. So not only am I thinking about how the top cards of each location are going to work together if they're drawn, or what people are looking for and if I can stop them from getting that card, but I'm also thinking about if I can stop people from getting cards that are further down in the piles. So a lot to think about, and again, nothing but excitement coming from me about this game and getting it to the table. The other 2 colors that were highlighted in the last week were blues and silvers, and they're fairly simple. So silvers, they're all about gaining helium. They're the casts that are right below gold. They're the financiers in the world of Red Rising, and in Red Rising there's a resource called Helium-3 that the helium resource in the game is based off of, and so all of their card abilities get them helium, and they might have to make sacrifices of other things in order to gain this helium, but that's kind of what they do, is they manipulate things in such a way they're going to gain lots of helium. And blue, while they basically just move you up on the fleet track, which can get you a ton of points, by the way. I'm looking at the number 10 spot and it's 30 something odd points for getting all the way up there on the fleet track. So these blue cards do great service to you as a player who's using them in the game. But they're also cool in that they're the pilots in the world of Red Rising, and they're actually, so all the colors are genetically modified in this world, but these guys are like technologically modified, where they're actually fused with ships in some way so that they're piloting them, but them and the ships are almost one or something along those lines. But because of this, the cards in the deck for blue, there's character cards, but there's also just straight up ship cards. And I just liked that way of shaking it up a little bit, where there's a cast that's not only just characters, but you also get to see some hardware as you're playing through this game as well, and it really kind of evokes the sci-fi theme behind this. When they were developing the solo mode for Red Rising, they really wanted to create a smooth experience for the solo player, because you're dealing with 14 different colors of cards and trying to think about how they're all going to interact and get them into your hand in such a way that they make a really cool combo. You don't really want to be worrying about another player too much, and so they tried to think of a way to make that as undisruptive for the player as possible. And so what they came up with was a deck, and the deck will indicate a few things on Tall Atama's turn. It's going to indicate where to deploy a card from her hand to a location, and then where and what location to draw a card from back into her hand. And whenever you are putting cards back into Tall Atama's hand, you're putting them on top of her deck. And so there's also on the card indications of bonuses. So if she's going to receive a bonus from a particular location, or if a card is going to be banished, or this kind of thing. So when you're deploying a card from Tall Atama's hand, you are not doing the deployability of that card. To be honest, when I was reading through the rules of the solo mode, I was getting a little confused, because it's fairly simple, but there's a few moving pieces in setting it up that make it a little complicated. There's a little deck of 4 cards, A, B, C, and D, that you shuffle and you deal out to the different locations during the setup of the game for the solo mode. Because on the card, it might indicate a particular location, but it also might indicate a letter. And the letter is corresponding to a certain location based on how you dealt out the cards at the beginning of the setup. And so there's going to be situations where you are going to be deploying a card for Tall Atama at a particular location and drawing from the same location because it happens to have the letter that you were being asked to take a card from. And so unlike you, she is able to deploy cards and retrieve cards from the same pile. And also on her turn, she does 2 lead actions, and she never does scout actions. Okay, so when it comes to scoring Tolotama at the end of the game, it's pretty interesting because at the beginning of the game, you've also set out another card which has odd or even on it, and you tuck it under the board in such a way that either odd or even is showing from out under the board. And what odd or even means is you're looking at the core points on the cards. If there's more odd core points or more even card points, then that's going to indicate whether the even or the odd is showing on that card that you're setting out. And then at the end of the game, you're going to be looking for what cards of Tolotama's are matching. So what it means by matching is how many of her cards match either the odd or even that was selected at the beginning of the game. So what you're going to do is you're going to take all the cards that she's accumulated throughout the game, and you're going to reduce her hand down to 20 cards. And then you're going to look at all of her cards, and all of her matching cards are going to gain her 6 points, and all of her non-matching cards are going to gain her 3 points. And on top of that, she starts with a base pointage of 70 points. So on top of those points, she also starts with a base of 70 points, and then she's also going to gain points, just like any other human player, for having helium, for being up on the fleet track, for having influence cubes at the Institute, or for having the Sovereign token. So you add all those things together and you see if your score beat Tolotama. So there you have it, a solo mode for Red Rising. We had no doubts, of course. So the last thing that we need to know, and the thing that I'm most excited about, is when the pre-order opens. The pre-order for Red Rising is going to open at around 10 a.m. on March 3rd, and then the games are going to be shipped out to pre-order customers as in early April sometime, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. Who knows about these kinds of things? But we're going to have a chance to get the game real soon. And as well as that, we're going to be starting to see reviews of this game starting on Monday. So that's the 22nd of February. We're going to start seeing reviews, and we'll get a chance to see what people are actually thinking about this game once it's hit their table. And so I can't wait to get a load of that. So there you have it, folks. Red Rising, we know everything. If you want to look up more about this game, there's tons of links down in the description below for you to go down a huge rabbit hole about this game. And let me know in the comments if you're going to pre-order this game, because I think I certainly am. And also let me know if you are jazzed about this game, or if all the hype and the buzz around this game, if you've had enough of it and you just want to be talking about something else. Let me know what you'd like to be talking about in the comments below. I'm still trying to gain my footing on this channel about the kinds of things that I discuss and talk about. I'm starting to get an actual sort of schedule in my mind about the kinds of videos and the frequency of which I will be releasing those videos. So hopefully you start to see some consistency before too long on this channel. Thank you so much for all of you who have subscribed already. If you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button, notification bell, the liking, the sharing, all that stuff. Please do all of that as much as you can. We just want to share the love and joy of board games here at Punchboard Party. So with that, see you next time, and until then, have the best day.